Sounded like somebody was trying to speak from a phone.
Yeah, so this is O'Brien. Apparently I've got a muted microphone that I don't know how to turn off. So I've got you visually and I'm speaking on the phone.
Okay. Just so you know, if you just hover over the bottom portion of your screen, it should bring up a series of controls. The image that looks like a microphone, you can click that to turn on and off your microphone.
It says that the mic, when I do that, it says the mic is muted by my system settings, and I'm not figuring out the system settings that mute it.
Okay, well, you can just use your phone to mute and unmute yourself then.
Great.
Everybody, we're live, so.
Okay, great. I think in that case, if we're live on YouTube and I think all the planning commissioners are on the call, I think we can go ahead and start this meeting. I did want to say this is our first meeting virtually like this, so we're, there's a couple things we might have to try to figure out during the meeting. It looks like there's a few people who are on the line who are members of the public who might potentially want to make comment. There will be time that I'd spoken with Mila earlier in the day. We kind of but the best way to have today is to first ask anyone who is simply wanting to listen in and not make comments to direct you to the live stream YouTube, which I believe, Kenny, if you could help with this, the live stream in, let me see, if you are on YouTube and you just Google Grand County Planning Commission, I believe it comes up, or can you give us a better address for anyone who's simply interested in listening in but not planning to provide any comment?
More specifically, if you Google Grand County IT.
Okay.
If you go to youtube.com and search for Grand County IT Services.
Okay, great.
I just dropped a link in the chat too for anyone who's on.
Oh, thank you, Emily. Okay, great. So, yeah, so anyone who can access that link in the chat or go to YouTube and search Grand County IT Services should be able to access the meeting on YouTube and not necessarily need to be in on this call. If you are in on the call, please mute when you're not speaking. It looks like most people are doing that, so thank you. And if you are hoping to make comment, I first wanted to ask if you have already submitted written comment and your verbal or visual comment today is in line with what has been submitted in writing. We'd ask you to please just go with what you have in writing. Every written comment has been provided to planning commissioners. We have been able to read those over and we'll incorporate feedback from the written comments into the discussion today. So if you have submitted written comments, I'd ask you to maybe refrain from also making a video comment as well today. If you are wanting to do comments about things that are not on the agenda, we'll open that up at 4:10. If you are wanting to make comments on the public meeting topic today, the Rancho Nuevo project, we'll do that at 4:15. So, and Mila, are you, let me just confirm with you, Mila, would you prefer people text you to get in line to comment? Or is there a better way that you'd like for people to get in line with their comments if they do have audio comments? I think that we'll probably just have people call in at 4:15, and then just go in order of those calling in. So, it would be great if anybody who is planning, is just here to listen, you know, as Abby said, could, just look on the YouTube channel, and then, if people have called in to make a comment, then I think we can just go ahead and call on those people, and as soon as they're done speaking, if they can hang up and leave the video meeting and then just continue watching on YouTube. I think that would be the smoothest way. Okay.
So just to clarify,
Yeah.
only join the Google Hangouts if you intend to make a comment. If you do not intend to make a comment, get out of the Google Hangouts and just watch on YouTube.
And could I say one more thing, Abby?
Oh, yes.
So the audio is getting a little bit hard to understand, and it looks like there's 3 or 4 people on the phone who have not muted themselves, and I thought maybe I could just read out their phone numbers, and if they want to mute their phone.
Yeah.
We can mute people. We don't need to call them out.
Oh,
We
really?
should be able to go through the, yeah. So we can just,
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. It does look like we're able to mute people who have called in. So,
Okay, great.
okay. Yeah. I think there was a little bit of background noise. I think for
Although make sure that you have Bob O'Brien unmuted because he's using his phone for audio.
great. Let me.
What's your last 2 digits?
Bob, drop your phone number in the, well, he probably can't access the chat from his phone, can he?
He's on his computer as well.
Bob, drop your phone number in the chat if you don't mind, so we can identify you and make sure you're.
I'll see you tomorrow.
See you, Jenny. Take care.
You too. Is your clock on?
Say what?
Sounds like Brian is having a background conversation.
No, I'm not. I'm being really quiet. I haven't said anything. I'm just.
Somebody is.
Yeah, across the office. The mic must be
Oh,
really,
gotcha.
really good.
So, let me-
Let's see. I think I have Bob's cell phone number. I can probably figure this out on my own.
okay, thank you, Zachariah. So, while,
Bob's number starts with 541 and ends with 49.
okay,
And I
Okay,
tried
so-
to unmute, but I don't think I have permission to do that. So.
He may have muted himself. I tried to unmute him as well. It doesn't look like I was able to do that.
it's giving me a thing that says I can't unmute someone else. So hopefully, Bob, if you can hear this, you're in charge of your muting right now and can unmute yourself to contribute.
Abby, also one more thing. If
Yeah.
with any voting tonight, if everybody would just be sure to call out, do a roll call vote.
Yeah, thank you. That's good as well.
To answer your question, Emily, I believe that Kenny is the meeting owner.
Okay, so Kenny, can you please check to see if you can unmute Bob's number that starts with 541
And ends in 89.
or 49?
49, sorry.
It's
To
not-
do that, Kenny, if you go to the people column,
Yeah, it's not.
there
letting
should
me
be
for some reason.
a mute sign next to each person.
Yeah, it's not allowing me to unmute him either.
Okay, another alternative, Bob, if you can hear us, is to hang up and call back in. But I think we should go ahead and get started.
Okay. So with that, before we open up for any public comments, is there any planning commission members who have any conflicts of interest or ex parte communications to bring up at this point?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. I'll take silence as a no, but if anyone on the commission does have anything, please do bring that up. So now I would open the phone lines right now for the next 2 minutes for anyone who would like to call in with the number at the top of the agenda and make any comment on an issue that is not currently on the agenda for this evening.
And Abby, so I just looked it up, and actually, if you are a phone participant and you have been muted by us at the meeting, the way to unmute yourself is to press *6.
Okay, so if a person has been muted and they would like to unmute themselves to make a comment right now about something that's not on the agenda, please type *6 and give us a hello and state your name, and we'll be able to take your comment that way. Okay, it does look like you have Bob back in the call, unmuted. So, all right. I'm going to assume that there are no citizens to be heard at this time. And I would like to remind anyone, especially virtual meetings, if you do have anything, contacting us via email is a very good way to get your comments out to the Planning Commission prior to the next meeting. And so then with that, we'll move on to our first. Oh, sorry, Penny, did you have something? So with that, we'll be able to move on to our first item on the agenda, which is the Rancho Nuevo subdivision. And we'll have staff give us an introduction on that, and then we will open up for any additional public comments aside from the comments that have been submitted in writing. So we'll turn it over to staff.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Mila.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute myself. So I'm going to share my screen with the site plan first. Let's see. I believe it should let me know if that works for everybody. Can you all see that, the site plan up there? Oh, wait, it's starting. There we go. It should be
Yes,
going.
I see it.
That should be working now.
Okay, great. Okay, so you've seen this before. This is the Nuevo Court subdivision. It's 3 properties on Nuevo Court for a total of 5.7 acres. It is currently zoned large lot residential, and all of the properties are vacant. The applicant is proposing 8 lots, which are allowed due to the underlying zone density. And staff is recommending approval of the preliminary plat, and that Planning Commission send a favorable recommendation to the County Council. The applicant has provided all the necessary materials and addressed the comments from the DRT for approval of a preliminary plat. The outstanding items that we've noted can all be addressed before final plat. And we have detailed some of these. There are a few plat issues, labeling public utility easements, making sure setbacks are in accordance with the land use code, and then some drainage easements issues. And then a few of the other things that the DRT we're requiring would be a more full drainage study, and then taking out the floodplain corner of lot number 5 and dedicating that as open space, and also adding in some fire turnarounds. The applicant has already been in contact with the building department and with the fire department to address these issues, and we don't see anything that would prevent the application from moving forward to final plat. The lots will be between 0.5 and 1 acre on the existing 3 lots. And there are, the preliminary drainage study is planned as single lot detention ponds. And the applicant is aware that they'll need to further that study and also show cross-lot drainage easements dedicated for potential overflow. The half-width improvements on Nuevo Court will be required, and that will include road widening. And the applicant is aware of that as well. And the utilities have all provided will-serve letters, so we don't see a problem there either. I think that's about it for our staff report. We can address the public comments now if you'd like, or we can do that in a little bit. Whatever you prefer.
If I could just clarify a couple of things prior to handing it back to you, Abby. I want to be clear that the Planning Commission understands its role here in this process. It is the land use authority for preliminary plats. It will not go to the county council for approval. So for a standard subdivision, the Planning Commission is the land use authority. For final plat, the county council is the land use authority. Okay, so the preliminary plat does not go to the county council. Mm-hmm. So you would be presumably making a motion to approve the preliminary plat with the conditions that Mila mentioned. Secondly, I want to clarify that the open space that Mila referred to coming out of lot 5 is not referred to as open space for the purposes of like functional open space that you would commonly think of when looking at open space. It is to pull it out of lot 5 for the purposes of FEMA floodplain permitting. Okay, so there's no naivety on the part of staff or the developer that this is dedicated open space for the purpose of public access. Technically, it would be open for public access, I suppose, if there were an easement to it. But really, it's not for that. Okay, so it's being pulled out of lot 5 so that lot 5 doesn't need a floodplain development permit.
Zachariah, I've got a question.
Okay.
So, what is the reason that the floodplain is being pulled out, but the steep slope is not? Aren't they both considered constrained?
So, the steep slope area is constrained, and so if and when
what is the difference between the floodplain and the other constrained lands within lot 5? Why is the floodplain only being pulled out? Or
well, because the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, regulates the floodplain, and the nature of their requirements is such that if that floodplain goes into the lot, then the lot owner needs to pull a floodplain development permit. If it's not part of the lot, then they wouldn't need to. The constrained lands associated with steep slopes can be in the lot, and it has no bearing on FEMA's requirements. But what I was going to suggest is that if and when a building permit is requested for lot 5, we will look at those constrained lands because structure cannot go on the area of the portion of the parcel that has slopes in excess of 30 degrees. So it can still be part of the lot. It can be used by the applicant for their own, or for the lot owner for their own enjoyment, but it could not be built upon.
Thank you, that's a good explanation.
Hey, Abby?
I have a related, I had a related question to that.
Okay, go ahead, Garrett.
So the plat that's on the screen right now, the
Right, go ahead.
preliminary plat, has building envelopes drawn, and it looks like the building envelope for lot 5, includes the steep slopes. Is that one of the things that's going to be fixed before the final plat?
So, I don't believe that those are intended to be exactly building envelopes. They're just the setbacks. Yeah, so for that lot number 5, like Zechariah was saying, it'll be subject to steep slope considerations in the land use code.
Okay, so
That said, I do think that it is reasonable to add a plat note specifying that development on lot 5, it needs to meet the steep slope requirements or the constrained land requirements in the land use code. It's not necessary; it's implicit, but I think it's reasonable to include that.
I think in some other subdivisions we've looked at recently, we did draw building envelopes which excluded steep slopes. So.
Yeah, so I think that's very reasonable.
Abby, if I know Mila was going to ask you as far as whether we want to go through the citizen comments or not now. What I would love to know is, Mila, you acknowledge that there are some things that also came up in comments that you think can be addressed before final plat, such as some of the easements and so on. I would love if you could at least pull those out of the summary that you sent us of the citizen comments, so we can start to differentiate between comments that are being addressed as far as staff is comfortable with conversations with the developer versus comments that are perhaps not addressed in the staff report or through conversations with the developer that need to be considered in a different way. Is that clear? Kind of what I'm asking?
Sure, I can just switch over to this document here and we can go through it as a starting point. I think that might be helpful. So did that switch over for everybody? Can you all see that now?
Not yet. I see a black screen.
Mila,
Yep.
can I ask one other thing, which is, as you do this is Bob O'Brien, by the way, as you do this, several of those would maybe be nice to put in as kind of conditions or something that we remind the county council of, because I think that's important. Things like a completed drainage plan and concerns about easements for where water goes off the property. So I don't know how we'll highlight those as you go along.
Sure. Yeah, I think we have some suggested conditions of approval, and a lot of those things will be addressed before final plat because the final plat wouldn't be able to be approved if most of those conditions weren't met. So I think okay. Can everybody see the document yet or no? Oh. No? Okay. I'll stop sharing and then I'll just reshare my screen. Okay. So let's see. It should go in just a second.
We can see that now.
Okay, great. Okay, so there were a number of comments related to the drainage study. The basic breakdown of those was that people were concerned there would be unintended consequences for downstream neighbors, and then also concerned that a full and detailed drainage study had not been done to the level of detail that would be needed for a final plat. They were also concerned about the floodplain contained in lot number 5, which we just discussed, and that Army Corps of Engineers permits would be required for any work in that lot. So as far as all of that goes, our response is that the county engineer has provided his preliminary approval for the drainage design, which letter you should have gotten just earlier today. And all of the other details and concerns about drainage and downstream effects will be addressed before final plat. The applicant, as we said, has plans to alter lot number 5 and take out that floodplain. And then as long as that's out, then as far as we're aware, there's no Army Corps of Engineer permits needed, and certainly not needed at this stage. So
Can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
Can you, before you go on to the number of allowed lots?
Sure.
So that, and sorry if I cut you off there, Mila. I didn't want you to move on too quickly. So for the Planning Commission's sake, the key point here is that preliminary plat approval does not require a final engineering design approval. Okay, so what we have received from Dave Dillman, the county's engineer, is a high enough level of confidence in the applicant's ability to meet the drainage requirements of Grand County's criteria that preliminary plat approval is warranted. So the applicant submitted a drainage study with an earlier iteration of their proposal. Even though the drainage design, in particular the move to the single lot detention basins, or the detention basins on each individual lot, which is different from the consolidated detention basin presented to you in a prior iteration. The drainage study is still adequate for the county engineer's review, in so much as he has enough confidence in the current drainage design that, again, preliminary plat is warranted. So it's not a final approval. That can happen between preliminary and final plat.
Does anyone have any questions about that?
So just to make this very clear, staff wouldn't see any reason to avoid approving the preliminary plat because of these drainage concerns that have been brought up, because they would have to be addressed in an adequate way before the final plat could be recommended for approval. And that if they are not addressed in an adequate way before the final plat is recommended for approval, there would be opportunities to, I guess, not approve the final plat.
Right, okay.
So I have one suggestion on that, if it's okay. I talked to Dave Dillman, and he said that he is not a geotech engineer, and I guess they don't have anybody in his company that is. So just a suggestion is that when the final engineering study is completed, that it be reviewed by a qualified geotech engineer.
I think that's reasonable.
It got a little staticky there at the end. Could you just repeat what you just said? Or clarify, Mila, if you wouldn't mind just summarizing.
Sure. Garish was just bringing up the concern that our county engineer is not a geotech engineer, and that we would request that the final drainage study be reviewed by a qualified geotech engineer.
Before the final. Okay, great. Thank you.
Right, to get a third-party sign-off.
Okay.
So that could potentially be included as a condition of approval.
I'm not sure about that. I think because that, it wouldn't necessarily be a condition of approval, I don't think, because that would be something that the county would be doing, not the applicant.
Okay. So that would just be something that your office would ask the county to do.
Yes.
I will state that engineering costs, engineering review costs that are extraordinary, meaning above and beyond the dollar amount included in the application fee for engineering review. If that's exceeded, then the costs of that review are borne by the applicant. And so, from staff's perspective, we will ask our county engineer to make a determination that a third-party geotechnical review is required. I think that is probably the safest and most defensible approach.
Okay.
Okay. So it sounds like we can move on to the number of allowed lots concern. So this is in regards to the number of lots that we determined were available considering the 20 dwelling unit limit on a dead-end street or a cul-de-sac in our land use code. We figured out that there were 8 lots available, and that includes preserving the right of the other currently vacant lot to build a dwelling unit. And the ADU applications, of which we have 2, were possibly the concern was that they would not be able to be vested. So the way that we figured this out was the state code considers a subdivision preliminary plat application as vested at the time a developer submits a complete and compliant application. And we worked with our county attorney to determine when an ADU application vests, and we've determined that that is at the time of an issued building permit. None of the proposed ADUs received building permits prior to Glen Lent's complete and compliant preliminary plat application. So unfortunately, that does mean that all 8 lots would be allotted to Nuevo Court subdivision, and then there would not be any more ADUs allowed until or if any of the other dwelling units were, disappeared and no longer a dwelling unit. The county attorney is going to issue us an official legal letter for this, but she supports this position, and I think that's kind of the end of our involvement in that part of it.
Okay. All right, so thank you for running us through that, Mila. I apologize, the timeline is a little bit off, but I would like to now open it up to anyone who would like to call in with public comment that has not already submitted with written comments. So I apologize, this is not a platform I've used before, so I'm not exactly sure how to tell if anyone has called in or if anyone, would it just be a person speaking up that they would like to comment?
Yeah, it does look like we have some people here. Just so they all know, everybody here is muted. So if you would like to speak, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mila.
And it looks like and is on as well.
Hi, this is Sherry Griffith calling in.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
And I did understand your point of comments already being submitted. And I just wanted to make a point that as far as what was downloaded on the website, I didn't see a completed application. There was no completed preliminary plat application, and there's nothing that detailed the drainage report that's required. And I just would like to ask if that was truly submitted. And I don't know that there's a full drainage report. And does that then qualify to vest this this development?
This application has been deemed complete. The drainage study that was submitted with the original application can be associated with this latest iteration of the subdivision design, and the standard application forms which are not a requirement to be included necessarily in the packet, or at least, we don't think that they're critical to the Planning Commission review, and they contain a lot of, personal contact information. Nevertheless, all of that has been submitted.
Okay. Thank you. That was my point.
I will note that we do have the applicant in our chat, or in our Google Hangouts. And Glenn, if you can hear us, with Abby's call, you can, address the Planning Commission when Abby is ready for that.
Yeah, I feel like that would be appropriate if there are not any more other citizen comments. It might be helpful to hear any other citizen comments first and then allow the applicant to respond and clarify if needed.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that he was with us. And then I've got a couple more points I'd like to address before you turn it over to him as well.
Okay. So if anyone else would like to make a comment, please speak up now so that we can include you in this.
Hi, this is Bob Radke. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Bob Radke. I did submit a letter, but my wife Wendy is here, and she has a question regarding the 20-foot boundary around property. We live at 2693 Nuevo Court, which we share our east and our north boundary with Rancho Nuevo. Is that 20 foot? And on the proposal, there's 3 flag driveways next to our properties. Is that 20-foot easement or boundary does that go along our east line or his west boundary also? Just a question for Zachariah, I guess, or Mila.
Sure. Let me put up the other screen here again real quick.
And Bob, can I clarify your question? Are you asking, does the 20-foot setback apply to the lot line, the boundary that you share?
Yes.
So I can actually answer that real quick. We do have that as one of the conditions of approval, is that the applicant has not shown the required 20-foot buffer around the project. So that will be addressed.
Okay, and even with the 3 driveways, that would include a 20-foot boundary would have to be between the driveways and our property?
No.
That's kind of the question.
No.
Just the lots.
That applies
just
to
his proposed
structures.
lots have a 20-foot. Okay. All right. Great. That answers that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Is there anyone else in the chat who would like to make a comment right now?
I would. My name is Jennifer Wenzel. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we live on Old City Park. I just kind of, I guess, want to throw out there, I didn't get my letter off to you folks, and I have a lot of the same concerns and comments in my neighbors, which you seem to be addressing, and I just want to throw out there that setbacks and drainage, like one of the maps that you presented showed that it's supposed to drain to Pat Creek still. We've already discussed in prior meetings that this property doesn't abut Pat Creek. So for me, it just seems like it's a little sloppy, I guess, that we don't have proper setbacks when he's already made it very clear to us in the neighborhood that he is very educated on this and knows exactly what he's doing, and he's an engineer. So I'm concerned by the lack of diligence being put forward in the preliminary plat, that there's not proper setbacks and that it still says it's draining to Pat Creek. And it just doesn't give me a lot of confidence in the project itself. And I also feel very, very strongly that geoengineering should be a part of this. We have one of the best flowing parts of Pat Creek here. It's an amazing thing to for the whole town of Moab, and it's very important. And so if that gets disturbed with all the springs in the neighborhood and people's wells and the flow of water in front of my house, I'm going to be very upset, because this could all be resolved by doing a little bit of homework on the front side versus just hoping it's going to be okay at the end. So I'm really looking forward to seeing proper setbacks, fire turnarounds for safety. I mean, this is all stuff we've already all talked about with everybody, and the fact that it's not corrected yet just doesn't give me a lot of confidence in any of it. And I'd love to see it all rectified before we go ahead and say, yeah, this is a go, guys, because it's a major impact, and I'm not taking it lightly. And I know we all have rights, and I'm not trying to say that he shouldn't have a right to build or anything like that. I'm just saying I want it done prudently, smartly. I want it to be done in a way it doesn't impact our water, because it's a valuable resource here in Moab. So thank you so much for giving me a minute to speak up. Sorry I didn't get it in the letter, and I appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you, Jennifer. Is there anyone else who would like to make comments right now? Okay, I'm going to, that seems like any citizens who would like to make comment have already submitted written comment or were able to speak just now. So with that, I would like to invite Glenn Lent, the applicant, to speak and see if any of the citizen concerns can be addressed. So Glenn, are you there?
Glenn, just to remind you, if you want to unmute yourself, you'll need to hit *6.
Actually, I think Glenn is joining via Google, so he needs to click the microphone thing on the bottom of the screen when he hovers, I guess.
You guys hear me now? Okay. Yeah, I have no further comments.
Okay. So.
Hello?
Oh, yes. Glenn, did you have anything else you would like to add?
Glenn is. Oh.
Okay.
Are you there, Glenn?
All right. So I believe Glenn Lent has said he has no further comments he'd like to add at this time. If you're able to, Glenn, could you just confirm that that's what you'd like to say?
It is what I heard him say also.
Okay, so I guess so we'll go with that, and if it is an audio issue or something, please jump back in and let us know, Glenn, and we can give you an opportunity to address some of the concerns.
Can you guys
hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. I'm on the phone. I haven't been able to get the video to work. But I've been listening, and I have no further comments.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, then we can return our discussion to Planning Commission members, and address this potential action item and discuss.
Before we start conversation, could I just ask if you are called in on your phone So if you're like on your screen, but you're called in on your phone and you're listening in, could you just take a moment and make sure your phone is on mute, your computer's on mute? There's some static that I think we're picking up.
What's that? All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. So, yeah, so at this point, I do think staff has addressed a lot of the concerns raised in the public comments. We've outlined what would need to be required before final plat approval. And so at this point, are there any other questions from Planning Commission members for staff or any further discussion, or I would entertain a motion on this issue.
This is Gary from Abby. I've got another question for staff. Are these detention basins allowed within the setbacks? Especially the rear lot setbacks?
Yeah, the setback refers to structures.
Okay, thank you.
This is Brian. I have a question. When the three flag lots together like that, is that considered like one roadway, or each lot will have to have their own roadway going to their lot?
We discussed this at the DRT meeting. Each lot does need to have legal access. So the way it's designed right now is that each lot has its own access. The applicant has the option to combine some of those driveways and turn them into a private access tract, but he's not obligated to. So this design is acceptable as it is.
Okay, thank you.
I will also note that private driveways don't need to be paved. They can be, gravel or dirt. And it's primarily just to ensure that each lot has legal access. So in this design, the applicant is actually providing a larger buffer between lot 8 and the lot to its west. Because if it were a combined private access tract, that would only need to be I think 24 feet wide, if I remember correctly, 20 feet of surface and 24 feet of road right of way. If I don't have those numbers correct, it's something like that. But as it's shown, it's 60 feet plus the setback, the side setback on lot 8. So in terms of a buffer between lot 8 and that lot to the west, this is actually a more favorable arrangement for the lot to the west and the eventual owner of lot 8. But all that's to clarify that this is an acceptable layout. In reality, you're not necessarily going to see 3 individual lanes for those 3 driveways.
I think I have another question, and that is, you kind of mentioned at one point drainage easements across properties within the subdivision must be dedicated. Do our regulations say anything about needing an easement across other people's properties for drainage, especially if the drainage is changed? Or so I'm just kind of curious about what regulations.
So that's exactly right. So if the drainage were to change, that is when you would need an easement across neighboring properties. The code allows for drainage to stay the same without an easement, and the applicant's drainage study from before has shown that the drainage would stay the same. So that's currently the situation, and if there's anything else that needs to be addressed with future studies and then an easement would be needed, then we would address that at that time. But as of right now, there's no anticipated change to historical drainage off the property.
This is Kevin. I have a couple of questions for staff. So some of this it overlaps with some things Garish said about the drainage study. It seems to me that the drainage here is much more complicated than in the typical subdivision, but from what I've seen of the drainage study so far, that they haven't taken into account certain unusual features of this lot. And so I'm hoping that when we get the review before the full plat, that some of those things will be addressed. And I think a lot of these are brought up in public comment letters, the springs that are very close by, the potentially unstable hillside, et cetera. And so I was wondering, maybe staff could say something about, one, to what extent those unusual features have already been addressed. Maybe I missed them. And two, how, if they haven't been addressed yet, how they will get addressed before the final plat is approved.
Mm-hmm.
Mayla, this is Garish. Could you pull up that drawing that shows the drainage drawing that Glenn submitted?
Yes, I don't think that was actually in the packet.
It is.
It is in the packet?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is. So I can look for it.
Page 44?
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Further down.
I think so. With the
okay, here, this one. Let's see.
I have it up, Mila, if you want me to share my screen.
Oh, is mine not showing up? I have
there.
it.
You got it.
It's there now. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
So I think part of what Kevin's might be asking is, if you look at the contour lines, the slope on most of the property goes kind of in the same direction towards Pack Creek. And what they're proposing is the detention basins and then overflow concentrating in the, I guess it's the southeast. I don't know where the north is on this. But anyway, the southeast corner of Lot 5, which is a change from the existing drainage pattern.
Northeast, yeah.
Okay, northeast. There we go. Appreciate that. So you see where they have the arrows pointing to where any overflow would be collected and then presumably spilled down across the slope.
So I can respond to
like
this.
it would be a fairly significant change. And if you look at the way the arrows along the north boundary line of the property, without having some major construction work, there's no way that water is going to move in that direction. It's just confusing to look at, so I've been trying to figure it out.
So I will respond to that. First and foremost, Grant County has a professional engineer to review development plans and make a professional determination on whether they are adequate or not. At this stage, our professional engineer, our licensed professional engineer, has determined that it is sufficient to at least get through preliminary plat approval. Now, we've had some discussion on the merits of hiring a third-party geotechnical engineer to further evaluate this. I would really caution planning commissioners from trying to play that role. But nevertheless, the drainage criteria for Grand County requires that the release rate for a detention basin be no greater than 0.03 CFS per acre. Okay, that is deemed to be lower than the historical offsite flow of this property based on the information that we have. Now, some residents of the area have suggested that's not the case. They are not professional licensed engineers either. And so, my direction as the department head, and based on consultation with the county attorney, is to allow the people who are hired and designated with making that determination make those determinations.
My confusion and concern is that I'm completely respecting the professional accreditation of our county engineer, and perhaps you can clarify for this, but my understanding is they've acknowledged that their area of expertise is not specific to this sort of ground spring water discharge type of assessment, to the extent that it is being raised by local neighbors and landowners, including some who are engineers themselves. And so I feel like there's just this gray area that I don't feel like I have the information I need to confidently say, yes, I think that this is an adequate use of this space, given the potential limitations and even potential risks to local, to abutting landowners to this particular set of plats. So that's where the lack of clarity around where they feel like they can make that designation versus where there would be the need for a third party. I just, maybe some clarification from staff on my misunderstanding of the engineer, the county engineer statements to that effect would be helpful, because it seems like that isn't quite resolved yet.
Yeah, and Zachariah, in response, I'm not claiming to be an engineer of any fashion, but I do know that water tends to flow downhill naturally.
And that is the direction that it has always flowed. Noting the topographical profile of this parcel, it has always flowed in the direction of southwest to northeast. Now, it's not like it's an extremely steep parcel all across it. So it's not like if you were to stand there today, you'd see, a river flowing across it. It's not like that. But the study suggests that, and reality suggests that, based on the topography of the parcel, there has always been some degree of off-site flow. And so the basic principle here is the development that's being proposed going to increase the off-site flow? And the answer to that is no, because of the drainage criteria that Grand County has in place. But there is always a spillway that is designed into a detention basin. And so to the degree that you see these arrows pointing, don't confuse them with volumes.
No, Zachariah,
that is the direction that the spillways would go.
It looks to me like some of those lines are going across slope rather than down slope, and so I'm just wondering, are they going to build I'm wondering how they're going to get their water to flow in the way that their drainage plan shows that water is going to flow. That's all.
But then, yeah, that's reasonable, and they may need to put in some, ditches. And again, I realize that brings up concerns about accumulation of volume, but the volume question should really be addressed vis-a-vis the drainage design criteria that the county has and the release rate from those detention basins.
I understand. I'm just trying to understand what this drainage plan is trying to tell us. That's all.
Well, first it's trying to tell you that that each lot will have a detention basin that captures stormwater running across that parcel.
I got that. Yep.
It then says, because of our design criteria, it's got to have a spillway. And it's showing you where the spillway would send that water in the event that the detention basin's capacity is exceeded. And the natural, course should be towards Pat Creek. Now, there have been comments that Pat Creek itself doesn't, abut this parcel, but nevertheless, that's where all the drainage is going to go. whether there's development or not. And so, you know, you can see the floodplain delineated in the northeast corner of the parcel, and that's where you would expect stormwater to run with or without a development.
And
no, actually, I would look at the contours and look at the fall line and say, I would expect water to go down the fall line and not be concentrated in the corner of Lot 5.
I think that the important thing to remember here is that the county is not going to approve a drainage plan that won't work according to our county engineers. And they also won't approve anything that is illegal according to the land use code. So whether or not we know that this drainage plan right now is potentially preliminary, but our county engineer has reviewed it and said that he feels like a drainage plan is very possible for this subdivision that would be in accordance with all of our requirements and wouldn't require the county to make any sort of exceptions at all. So I think that, we've talked about requiring a third-party geotechnical engineering review, and that is, I think, definitely something that we should be thinking about. But I don't think that any of us in this meeting are particularly well qualified to debate the exact merits of what the drainage plan is on the preliminary plat right now.
Agreed.
I agree with that as well. So speaking of, as we're getting toward making a motion, having, it is not necessary to make an additional condition that a drainage study be completed before the final plat, because that is already required for a drainage study that the county engineer does approve to be completed, but usually a condition of approval. I guess it wouldn't be, if the planning commission did feel it very important to include requirement that a third-party geotechnical engineer review the plan prior to final plat approval, would that be appropriate to include in an approval of the preliminary plat, or would it be more appropriate to just, I think the property developer is very aware that that is desired at this time, and maybe write a letter to the county engineer. What, this is a question for staff, I guess, if the planning commission does feel that that third-party review is important, what would be the best way to communicate that to the applicant and the county engineer?
Well, I would agree that it's unnecessary as a condition of approval because it's implicit in the requirements that need to be met prior to final plat approval. If the planning commission wants to include it as a condition, it would be as simple as stating that, a third-party verification of the drainage design by a geotechnical engineer, is required.
So this is Kevin again. So my original comment was not about what Garish brought up and what we've been discussing the past 2 minutes. Personally, I'm satisfied with these surface flow issues, and I think that's going to sort out. But I guess what's unusual about this property, and which, as far as I can tell, hasn't been addressed yet in any of the engineering reports, is the presence of the springs and that kind of thing. And I've managed to find the packet, which contains a letter from Dave Dillard, the county engineer. And I'm going to quote from that. It says, "The study does not make any mention of the existing springs or seeps on the banks of Pack Creek within the development boundaries and adjacent properties." Then he asks a rhetorical question: is there a potential to affect these things? And then here's the important sentence: "This issue should be addressed by a qualified geotechnical engineer or hydrologist." And so far as I can tell, that hasn't happened yet. My comment was just, I think it's important that it does happen, and I don't know if it happens now or later or what, but I just think those things should be addressed, and as far as I can tell, they haven't been yet.
And staff wholeheartedly agrees with that. But Dave is clear that those elements don't need to prohibit this from receiving a preliminary plat approval. Those are elements of the final design.
Okay, that's my question.
We're reviewing a final design.
Okay, so before the final design, there will be the study by the qualified geotechnical engineer. Is that what you're saying?
It looks like that's what our county engineer is saying.
It does look like, well, he was recommending that, but I'm guessing that staff has some influence on whether that happens as well.
We follow his recommendations as far as engineering goes.
Okay. Well, as long as his recommendation hasn't changed, I guess it'll happen.
Okay. Yeah, so I appreciate the amount of discussion that we've been able to have about the drainage and also springs and seeps and other hydrological issues on this lot. I think if there's nothing more on that, we could entertain a motion on this topic.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin, if you want to do it.
It was actually Obi.
Sorry.
You know, when we make this motion, it seems to me that we might think about the second paragraph that is on the staff recommendation, where it says outstanding items, blah, 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 blah. They aren't conditions, they're outstanding items. And there, I don't know if we've, outstanding items, if we want to, we can mention, a final drainage study, and then maybe something that it may be important to have somebody who's a geotechnical engineer. So I just didn't want a motion to get made before maybe we could have that put in, approving this, but then saying these are some things that concern us.
And Bob, you might not be able to see this, but Zachariah also called out the two things that have been raised explicitly in the chat here, which is the building envelope on lot 5, and then the request for the geotechnical engineer to review.
Yep.
Okay. Abby, I'm happy to make a motion if you're ready.
Yes, please go ahead, Emily.
Okay. So I move to approve the Rancho Nuevo subdivision preliminary plat, and send a favorable recommendation to the county council for final plat, subject to the following conditions. That the plat show a building envelope on lot 5 due to steep slope constraints, that a request is made for a third-party geotechnical engineer to review the plan prior to final plat approval, in addition to the outstanding items noted by staff in their staff report.
Okay, do you have a second?
Second.
Sorry, can you state your name as the person who seconded?
Brian.
Okay. So that was a second by Brian.
Bob O'Brien.
Bob O'Brien. Right. Wait, cut out for just a second. All right. So Emily made the motion. Do you have any additional comment you'd like to add?
No, I feel like the discussion captured my comments.
Okay. Okay. Any additional discussion between planning commission members right now?
About one comment on Emily's motion. Emily, I would suggest that the building envelope not be exclusive to lot 5, should be included on all. I'm sorry, Abby. When you're ready.
For just a second. Could you repeat that? I apologize about that. I think it solved the problem now.
Her audio cut out, Garish. I think she can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry. I apologize for that, Garish, if you wouldn't mind just repeating. Thank you.
I would just suggest that the building envelope be included on all the lots and not exclusive to lot 5.
Alternatively, may I recommend that an amendment to the motion suggests that building envelopes be shown on lots shown to have constrained development conditions. So for instance, like lots 5, 6, or 6, 7, and 8, you know, are not going to have development constraints.
Okay. So would someone like to propose that as an amendment to the initial motion?
Sure, I will do that. I propose that we amend the motion to, you know, along the lines of Zachariah said, so that lots that contain constrained lands, the building envelope is also shown for those.
Okay, so any further specifically on that amendment before we
Did
vote?
you get a second on that?
Oh, I apologize. A second.
Okay, I'll second. I didn't hear.
No, thanks, Emily. So no, any further discussions on that amendment? Okay.
Makes sense.
Well, the only discussion I've got is that, as Kevin pointed out, building envelopes have been shown on other plats that we've looked at, and I don't know why this project would be any different. But if we're only concerned about constrained lands, I guess I'm okay with Kevin's amended motion.
Okay.
We've only required the building envelopes be shown where there are conditions on a given lot that warrant showing that building envelope, not on every lot in a subdivision.
Okay, so I will call for a vote, not on the entire thing, but just specifically on this amendment, and and after that vote, we will look at voting on the entire motion that's been made.
Point of order, could we have
Yeah.
staff roll call for that? Or do you want us to just, how are we doing this?
I think we are doing it as a roll call vote.
Okay, thank you.
So, so staff, will you call on us individually and we can do our votes from there? Thank you, Emily.
Thanks for the clarification.
So Kenny, could you do the roll call and we'll tell you how we vote on this amendment?
Yeah, I can do that. Do you want me to just call out each individual's name?
Yeah, I think if we just go down the list of our names one by one, we can give you our vote, and that will just be a very clear way to do this.
Isn't that the chair's job?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.